Hi, this is Teresa Milani recording Real Men, Real Issues, and I'm coming live from the Hilton Hotel in London. And this morning I'm actually talking to Claude Abrams, who is a fitness trainer, a former journalist, and he spent a few years been a traveling dad where he was a dad full time. Welcome, Claude.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So you're a very interesting guy.
Thank you.
What what is the most important thing from your perspective for us to chat about this morning?
From my perspective, I don't know. There's a million subjects that are interesting to me. I could talk about health. I can talk about children. I can talk about education. I can talk about sport. I can talk about fitness. I can talk about childbirth. All these things are interesting to me. I could talk about psychology, philosophy. I'm very interested in all of it.
That's brilliant. So you sound like a well-rounded guy.
I try to be well-rounded. I mean, in the sense of, I feel there's a lot to learn in this world, and I feel every instance and every experience offers me some nugget of wisdom that can help my next experience be even better. And I try to go through life with that sort of mindset, that I can keep progressing and keep learning. In the same way, when I coach my clients, every day is an opportunity to practice and get better for the next day and for the next day. And it's a long road. And I always say to my clients, don't look at physical fitness and training as a 6-week stint or a 12-week stint. It's a lifelong journey, and life's a long journey. Keep trying to get better and make more of it. So, because the moment you take a short-term view of something, that when you reach a goal or you reach the end of the road, then you switch off and then you stop. So it's better to see it as indefinite, but keep setting small goals on that road, that indefinite road.
Absolutely, and that makes a lot of sense, really, because I know from coaching people, when people have got to the goal and then they've finished it, some people actually, their mood dips.
Yeah.
So
oh yeah.
setting new things all the time is a good way of preventing that from happening.
Well, that's clear evidence that the value is in the journey, right?
Completely.
Because when people reach the mountaintop, it's like, right, I'm at the top of the mountain, I can see a great view, but what now?
Yeah. And there's still the stars.
There's still the stars, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So it'd be interesting to hear something of your journey.
My journey, depends where you want to start that journey, but my journey really probably, let's start it around the age of 6 or 7. And around that time, for whatever reason, and I can't even identify why, I became interested in the sport of boxing.
Right.
Prior to that, I was really mad about football, and I always thought I was going to be a football manager.
Right.
And then something happened. I must have got a glimpse of boxing on television or something. And I'm not an aggressive guy or anything like that, but there was something about boxing that absolutely captivated me. Like a thunderbolt out of the sky had hit me, and someone had said, you need to do something in boxing. And I became absolutely 100% obsessed with the sport of boxing. And to the point that when I did my exams and my O-levels, as they were in those days, my art exam was a watercolor of a famous boxing fight. My English exam was a report of a boxing fight. Everything was geared to boxing. And in my spare time as a kid, I would read through record books and memorize information, because I just knew there was something bigger around the corner, but I didn't know what it was. And around the age of, it would have been 1980, so I'd been 13 years of age. I was doing a paper round, and I saw this magazine. In fact, my brother, who was doing a paper round with me, had one of his clients had a magazine called Boxing News, a weekly boxing publication. And the moment I saw that, I thought, I can't believe this. There's a publication on this sport every single week. Of course, it turned out this was the longest running boxing publication in history. It's now over 100 years old. Survived 2 world wars. The offices were bombed in World War II, and it still came out every single week. And my journey at that point was to work for Boxing News. So I knew at the age of 13, that's what I wanted to do. And that's what I chased with absolute obsession. I chased it every day. Everything I did was geared towards that. And when we talk about, I don't know if you saw the recent interview with Joe Dispenza on London
No, I
Real.
didn't, but
Fascinating interview.
Yeah,
but in that interview, he talks about creating reality and marrying your intentions with your energy. And when you align your intentions and your energy, you create a very powerful force in terms of making things happen. Around that time, at the age of 13, my intentions and my energy were so powerful that I was moving in the right direction. So let's fast forward about 6 years. And by this point, I'd just left school, and I was thinking, what am I going to do? And there were no opportunities in boxing, even though I was sending letters out to every single person in the industry, just looking for an inroad. And I would have done anything, and I would have done it for free to get the opportunity. And then I decided I was going to get a job in the fire brigade because I was very active and I was always into sport and I was always into fitness. And one morning I'd just been for a run and I came home, and on the radio was an advert on Radio London. And the advert said a boxing promoter is looking for someone to work in his office. Just at that moment, I came in the door and I thought, this is me. Picked up the phone straight away before I'd even had a shower, rang up, and they said, can you come in for an interview this afternoon? So it was with the boxing promoter, Frank Warren. And I got showered, I got on the train, went into London and had the interview. And straight away, they offered me the job to work in his office. And I thought, this is my breakthrough moment. So I worked for Frank Warren, and I was there for just shy of a year when we had a dispute, and I decided I can't work there anymore. And I thought that was the end. So I left that job, and I decided I was going to go and travel and go to Australia. So that was my plan. And I thought that was just going to be my contribution to boxing. So I decided I was going to go and travel to Australia. And then one evening, my brother and I were watching a documentary on television about Australia. And I said to him, that's where I'm going to be in a few months. And he said to me, but what if the editor of Boxing News, which was the magazine that I got as a 13-year-old and always wanted to work for, what if the editor of the Boxing News rang you up and offered you a job? And I said, that is the only job that could possibly keep me in this country. No word of a lie, 10 minutes later, the phone rings. My brother picks up the phone and he's talking to someone. He says, it's the editor of Boxing News. And I thought, it's a joke because we were just talking about it. I picked up the phone and sure enough, it was the editor of Boxing News. Said there was a vacancy. Would I be interested? And he'd heard that I was interested through my time working for Frank Warren. I said, of course I am. So I went the following week to the offices of Boxing News for an interview, and I was offered a job. And that's where I started as a junior reporter. So fast forward another 13 years, and I became the editor of Boxing News. So it was 10 years, and then I became the editor of Boxing News at the age of, I think I was 29. And wow. I held that position for 13 years. And then I stepped down as editor of Boxing News. And that was my boxing journey. And it was after that, and I can backtrack a little bit. I knew about 6 years before I left Boxing News, I knew I had to leave that job. So something happened to me when I was watching boxing, almost a shift in consciousness, where I suddenly didn't see boxing as a contest between two men, but I started to picture it as something a lot deeper and harsher than what I had seen it as. So I started to view it as two men fighting, inflicting punishment on each other, irreparable damage, which is effectively what it is. And maybe worse than that was thousands of people on television and around the arena watching this as a form of entertainment. And there was something harshly barbaric about it. And once my mind had shifted into that perspective, it was impossible for me to reverse it. I couldn't just say, I'm going to forget about that and just carry on watching it the way I did before. I just lost most of my enjoyment. And I knew then I had to have an exit plan, but I didn't know how, because this was my job. This was my living. This was my security. This is what I knew. And during that 5 years, I'd got married and I'd had my first child. And then I decided I'm going to coincide my departure with the 100th year celebrations of Boxing News. And I announced to my publishers that I was stepping down, and nobody knew. Nobody knew until about a month before I left that I was even contemplating leaving that job. So I had to mask it and I had to fake it for a while. I wouldn't say that I was completely devoid of interest and enjoyment. I did enjoy it, and I liked the process of writing and describing an event and going into detail about it, but I didn't have the same passion for it. And I felt an element of dishonesty of continuing that job when somebody could be in my shoes with the passion that I had when I started it, and to take that magazine forwards in the way it deserved. And so that's when I stepped down. And then I was at that junction of, well, what do I do now? What is life? And this is where my wife and I at the time decided we're going to go traveling. So we sold our home in London, and with the money from the home, we decided to go and travel to countries in the world that we'd always wanted to visit. And we ended up, the idea initially was, let's travel for a year, maybe a year and a half. We ended up going for 4.5 years. We came back to the UK.
Extraordinary.
Yeah. So that's a big chunk of the journey.
Absolutely. So I'm guessing that you changed as a man during that time, that you go on to much deeper levels as a human being, but also as a guy.
Yeah, very much so, because there was a lot of fear involved in jumping from a very safe place, which is the safe place being the one that you know, the one that you're very familiar with, the one that you can do in your sleep, to the unknown. And the unknown is always scary for anybody. And I was right into the unknown. And I wanted, having watched boxers my whole life and seen them start their careers as young men and finish their careers as old men, and seen a lot of hurt and seen a lot of damage and seen a lot of turmoil, I kind of got a little bit weary of observing that. But I also witnessed a lot of men, boxers, who only knew how to fight. That was their gift. They knew how to fight. And when they reached that point in their lives where their careers were over, they didn't know what to do afterwards. So you see a lot of men, a lot of tough boxers struggle with life, really struggle with life. And to the point of suicide, depression, alcoholism, drug addiction, because that's their way of masking the reality of what they have to face after their careers are over. And there's no safety net for boxers. There is none. You turn professional, you have this big career ahead of you, you're promised money, because if you're a good amateur, you're likely to be a good professional. And you can make a lot of money, but one punch can finish your career, one punch can potentially kill you. And if your career's over, and if it's over young, what do you do? Where do you turn? What's your skill? What's your plan B? And boxers don't like to think about plan Bs because they want to be 100% focused on their careers. And so I saw a lot of boxers make comebacks and comebacks and comebacks to try and reignite that moment when they were on top of the world or they were as good as they were. Always trying to rediscover that magic, but it never ever happens. And it's a sad sight to see, because you see once elite performers looking very ordinary, and that's a sort of sad picture to be left with, but it's almost a very natural process of what happens. And I always said to myself, if I leave boxing, I'm never coming back to boxing. So when I left, I went cold turkey and I got rid of everything I had that was associated with boxing. So all my books, every memento I had, I sold or got rid of. And I never watched another fight for, must have been 6 years. Never watched a fight for 6 years. Totally cut myself off. And that's when I went traveling. And traveling was a great escape in a way, because it gave me something else to focus on. I wasn't sitting at home twiddling my thumbs thinking, I could be there, I could be doing that, I could be in Las Vegas watching this. I was out traveling and I was doing something else. It gave me that path to building a new future and learning new skills and doing something different. And that new path effectively was being a full-time dad for 4.5 years.
Yeah. So I guess you learned to relate to yourself in a very different way.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I did learn to relate to myself in a different way, but I have to say, if I had my time again, I wouldn't be a boxer.
Right.
Because I was a boxer before I became a journalist. And it's a very unique experience. And in terms of self-discovery, there's nothing I've ever experienced that teaches me more about who I am than being in a boxing ring, confronted by a man trying to hurt you, and you have no escape. And if you're especially in a ring with somebody who's better than you, that's a pretty frightening situation. But you can't run and you can't escape. So you have to find something within you to survive that moment. And you do find something within you. So it makes you go really deep, makes you stand on your own 2 feet, and makes you survive. But your survival instincts are magnified by 1,000. So boxing taught me a lot about myself. It's a very insular sport, because you fight by yourself, train by yourself. And from a very young age, I spent a lot of time by myself, with my thoughts, dealing with things. So when I traveled as a parent, that was just a different experience. I wouldn't say it was a better one in terms of discovering myself, but it was just discovering myself from a different angle, because now I was this man who had to look after children. I had a second child while we were traveling. So it just a shift in perspective, really. I was discovering myself as a father, discovering myself as a husband, discovering myself as a breadwinner who wasn't working. So I didn't work for 4.5 years. We just lived from day to day. It was a very different experience.
Absolutely extraordinary. So it sounds very different, being, like you say, in the boxing ring where you're in that insular world. And of course, if you're looking after a child, you can't be insular.
Absolutely not. No, that's the big shift that happens, is that you are now responsible for somebody else. Yeah. They are totally dependent on you and your partner, if you have a partner. And you can't be as selfish. You just have to take care of them, which is a totally new experience. And I didn't become a father until I was 39. So it's quite an advanced age for being a dad.
Yeah. So I'm guessing you were with the birth of both of the children. And
I was. Yeah, so both my children were born in toilets, oddly enough. So
Right.
my wife, who's very good at giving birth, say if she has a gift, it's giving birth. And so when my son was born, we had a water bath set up in the living room of our house,
Right.
and our boiler had broken down the day before she went into labor. And so on the day that she started having her contractions, my job was to fill this thing up with a kettle, and it was taking forever. And meanwhile, she was doing her thing, and we had a midwife who was with her at the time. Only turned up in the last 20 minutes, in fact. So it was just my wife and I. I was filling the pool, she was doing her thing, but almost instinctively, she looked to find the safest place in the house, the safest room in the house. And that for her was the smallest room, which was the toilet. So
Right.
she gravitated towards the toilet and she stayed in there. She sat on the toilet and just did her thing. And then midwives turned up, by which point I was nearly had the bath ready, but she wasn't interested in going into the bath at that point. She was where she needed to be. She was hidden away in there. And then my son came out, and I was the one to catch my son as he was born, which was a pretty amazing experience. And so the whole process, you know, from contraction to birth was about 3 hours long. So not that long, no medication, anything like that. My wife was just very good at connecting with herself. She's a yoga teacher, so she used the power of her breath. We read a lot of books about natural birth, so we understood to some degree what was going to happen, what was the best way to do it, to use gravity as they do in Africa and all these Asian countries, stand up, let gravity help the baby come out, all these things. And we tried to do it the old-fashioned way, and that's what happened. So my son came out, natural birth. It was great, healthy, 9 pound baby, and yeah, and that was it. So I was there at the birth, and for my daughter, we were living in Brazil, in an eco village, population of about 100 people. Nearest hospital was maybe 15, 20 miles away. And to get there, you'd have to go over a seriously bumpy road, cross a river in pitch darkness. It just wasn't even in the equation. And again, my wife didn't want a hospital birth under any circumstances. And the midwife we had in Brazil was she was a bit fancy in the sense that she wanted to use drums and create this sort of atmosphere. And that's not what my wife wanted. She wanted it to be instinctive, quiet. And so on the night that she went into labor, she decided she was going to do it by herself. She was going to give birth by herself. And again, she retreated into the toilet of this house we lived in, this wooden house with no windows. And I had my brief as to what to do when that happened. And I was getting everything prepared, but she wasn't coming out of the toilet. And so there was one point I went down, she called for me to help because she had like a momentary period of panic where the baby was coming out, and she felt down and felt the baby's head and got a bit freaked out because she'd never felt a baby's head before like that and didn't know what it was. And at that point, the midwife turned up unawares. And just before that, actually, she was loitering outside.
Right.
And without being within eyesight, my wife could sense that she was there. It was just that animal instinct. There's somebody there, and it stopped her in her tracks. And she said, "Who's outside?" And I went outside, and sure enough, the midwife was there. And I invited her in. And within about 30 seconds, the midwife pulled my daughter out. And she was born. And again, for that birth, from start to finish, from first contraction to birth, was about 45 minutes. Incredibly fast. And then my daughter was born. So life changed again. So then we had the 2 children. And we carried on traveling for another year and a half, 2 years after that, I think. which was
Extraordinary.
so my wife had her entire pregnancy on the road, the birth in Brazil, and then we carried on traveling to countries like Malaysia and India and Indonesia and Australia and New Zealand and Canada after my daughter was born.
Extraordinary. This is fantastic. So, do you think it made a difference to how you bonded with your children, given that you were actually there?
Totally, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I was there in their lives every day, every moment of every day. And you can say that was good and bad, because it was good from a perspective of supporting my wife. It was good from a perspective of bonding, because I walked around all day long with my daughter and my son in a sling, and we, there's that connection, skin to skin connection, which is important. And I was an ever-present figure, so they got to know my smell and my vibration and my voice, and you get to see them. You get to see them grow, which is amazing on a day-to-day basis. So yeah, I think there was a very strong bond, a very strong bond.
Yeah. Well, what was it like for you that first moment you picked up your first child? Because I know from like having brothers myself, one of my brothers is a particularly tall fellow. He was uncomfortable with picking up his child because he is so big. That very first day of hurting her.
Yeah. Well, I do remember catching my son and thinking how incredibly slippery he felt as he came out, because he
Yeah.
came out fast
Yeah.
over the toilet, and it was touch and go whether I dropped him in. It was that fast. So I grabbed him, but it was just an amazing. It was like it was a miracle, to see a life come out of another human body is quite an extraordinary event to witness under any circumstances. But I
Absolutely.
didn't feel detached. I didn't feel uncomfortable. I just, yeah, I kind of did what I had to do, because that was my job. And so in terms of raising the child, our goal and our objective was always to be as natural as possible, to be connected as much as possible. We co-slept with our children
Right.
for a long time. My wife breastfed my son for 4 years, my daughter for pretty much the same period of time. And then they slept in the same bed with us until they decided they didn't want to sleep with us. So there was a lot of connection going on.
Yeah, that'll be great.
That sounds extremely organic.
Very, yeah.
And in some ways, going against what Western society tells us we have to do.
Absolutely against it, yeah. But I wouldn't say we're rebels, but we have alternative views of things.
Yeah.
And we just took the approach of, if people don't like it, they don't like it. But this is what we felt was intuitively right. And we had to honor that. It wasn't a case of, we're going to go to hospital because every society says we must. We had to honor what intuitively felt was the right thing to do. And that felt like the right thing to do. And looking back, still felt every single step of the way as the right thing to do.
Yeah, no, for sure. You certainly have come on an extraordinary journey, because, listening to you, I wouldn't necessarily think that somebody who was in the boxing world for so long would be having this kind of a conversation. And obviously you've had to live it in order to have this conversation.
For sure. I haven't always sought out to be different, but I've always felt different. Not necessarily different in the sense of I'm better than anybody else, just different in the sense that I don't feel like I think and feel like everybody else. And so when I was in the boxing world, that wasn't necessarily a natural environment for me. And even being a boxer when I was boxing didn't feel like a natural environment, but it was something that I was led to do. and something that I felt I had to do. And I've tried to look into why because there's no history of boxing in my family at all, not a shred of it. And I thought, well, why did I get attracted to this sport? It just doesn't make sense. But there was something about it. And I personally think it might have had something to do with the fact that in my household, my mother was the dominant force. She was the one who wore the trousers. And I don't know if from a masculine point of view, I needed to fill a gap of some kind by gravitating towards a sport that is very masculine. Even though there are women who box, it's still a very much a masculine driven and a masculine dominated sport. And I don't know if that was what my driving force was, but when the time came to move away from boxing, I moved away as a participant. And it was almost a seamless transition from competing to the moment I got that first job with the boxing promoter. And that was, again, my avenue out of competing, because it was a bit of a love-hate experience, boxing, because I loved the training and I loved the idea of being the boxer, but the actual fighting is an incredibly nerve-wracking experience. And every single fight I ever had, I always used to think to myself, why am I doing this? Why am I putting myself through this? But I knew I had to, and I did. And I went through it every single time. That was the process.
So I'm guessing some of this is what's actually contributed to you being a quality man, really, a high consciousness man.
Possibly. I think it was like I said earlier, the shift in consciousness that made me move away from boxing. It's not to say that everybody who follows boxing is of a lower consciousness.
No, true.
My consciousness shifted to a degree that I was no longer comfortable being a spectator in the sport of boxing. Now I've worked through it a little bit more. I can sit down and I can watch boxing, and I don't have the same feelings I had when I walked away from it. But I don't feel any compulsion to watch a big event if one comes up. Whereas as a child, when I was really into it, there was a big event. There's absolutely nothing in the world that could have stopped me from watching it. And it was on my mind for months and months. I was just so excited about it. But now there's big events come and go, and it just means nothing to me, really.
Extraordinary. So how would it be if your children came home and said, Daddy, I want to watch this boxing match? How would that be for you?
Not a problem. And someone once asked me, they said, well, what would you do if your son wanted to be a boxer? And I said, well, first I would wake him up at 5 o'clock every day, and I'd take him running. And I'd say, if you want to be a boxer, this is how you have to do it. And if this is too hard, then you're probably not cut out for it, because that's what you have to do. I mean, it's a lot harder than that, but that would be the first step. But my son's not got any interest in being a boxer. But over time, I've sort of opened up a little bit more to them about it, and they ask me questions. And just the other day, in fact, my daughter was asking, I was wearing a Cassius Clay t-shirt, and my daughter was trying to read it and saying, what's that say on your t-shirt? And I got her to read it, and she said, who's that? And I said, well, that's Muhammad Ali, but that's his name. And then she's just started asking me all these questions about who he was, and she sort of knew a little bit about him anyway. It pricked her interest in who he was and who he was as a father and how many children has he got, and it just led to one conversation after another. And in the end, we ended up watching a documentary about him. And even the next day, she was still asking me all these questions about his life. And I thought, and the reason I went down that route with her is because I felt that not only was he a great athlete, but the story of his life had a deeper context, which can affect a lot of people, whether they're sports fans or not. And that was the part of his life that I wanted to share with her, given that I had that opportunity because she was asking questions.
Yeah. Well, I guess with any athlete, it doesn't matter who
with
they
any
are.
athlete.
They have a full life
Yeah,
that is off the track or off the boxing match or the football arena or whatever.
yeah,
And I guess it's good that we bring this to our children's attention.
for sure. Yeah, yeah,
You know, and I guess as well, like you're talking about getting your son up at 5 o'clock in the morning if he wanted to do boxing training. You know, I guess at an early age is good for them to understand how much goes into becoming a professional at anything.
anything. Yeah, it's sacrifice, isn't it? And it's about teaching people that nothing's handed to them on a plate, which I think a lot of young children have difficulty with these days, to be quite honest. They're living in a very different age to the one I grew up in and the one my father grew up in. And maybe I don't, maybe it's a generalization, but I don't see them wanting to make the same sacrifices because in a lot of cases they don't have to.
True.
A lot a lot of them have it spoon fed and they don't feel, they feel almost entitled. I do sense a lot of entitlement in the younger generation.
Yeah. How can we help them get over it?
That's a tough one, really. And I've been thinking about that question, actually, even though you've only just posed it to me. But that is something that comes up for me because my son is now about to turn 12.
Right.
And children have to lead their lives and they have to make their own choices.
Absolutely.
And they don't like being preached to. And you can't, sometimes you just can't teach a child something through your experience. They need to go through it themselves because the best experiences are A, often the hardest ones, and B, are the ones that you've had yourself. And so you almost have to, again, spectate and watch it happen, but you're there to catch them if they fall sometimes, or guide them or pick them up if they have lost heart and they're, you know, I think that's the parents' role rather than to warn them not to do it. I think they just have to choose their journey because they've all got different personalities and different desires. And I remember as a child, when my parents asked me, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I said, at the age of 12, I want to be a boxing writer. And they sort of said, you got to be realistic. That's not going to happen.
Right.
It was like them deciding that that wasn't a job or that wasn't going to happen. That was an impossibility. And in my mind and in my heart, I felt and knew that was a possibility. And so I feel like I had their backing. And I don't want to do the same to my son, but I do catch myself every now and then when he says to me, I want to be a professional gamer on Xbox. And I think, seriously? You know, it's electronics, but deep down I'm thinking, well, what if he's really good at that? What if that is what his passion is? Should I really be trampling on that? You know, so it's about managing it all the time. It's about managing, especially with electronics, managing how much is good for them and with their talents, and to help steer them on that journey.
It's a difficult balance.
Very difficult balance. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very.
And I'm guessing one of the things as well, now that you're back in this country, is that you're having to juggle working and being a father and all
Yes.
the other things.
Yes. Because my wife and I are no longer together. So
Right.
we share the responsibility of looking after our children. So she has them for half the week. I have them for half the week. Luckily, we're on really good terms. I say luckily, or maybe we just chose to be on good terms. But that definitely helps in terms of managing a difficult period for our children. And it's almost been a seamless transition for my children to go from living under one roof to living under two roofs. And they don't seem to be adversely affected by it. They come to my house and they know what the boundaries are and they know what they can do, and they seem to have a great time. And go to my wife's house, they do the same thing, and each week we chop and change, and it all seems fine.
That's remarkable.
Yeah, it could be seen as remarkable, yeah. But I do put it down to the fact that they're not caught in the middle of a war.
Right.
And they don't see animosity. They don't see hatred. They don't hear hatred. They don't hear me talking badly about their mother and vice versa. And so if that were the case and we were talking badly each other, that's going to spill over into the consciousness of our children. And that's not really what we want to do.
Yeah. So did you and your wife work at this separation so that it would be harmonious, for want of a better word?
I don't think so, to be honest. I think it's maybe a reflection of who we are as people, that it went that way. I mean, when we broke up, it was very tough for me, and I did feel really hurt and upset and thinking, what does the future hold, and how's it all, again, stepping into the unknown. And I just worked through it. I worked through it by myself,
Right.
which is what I tend to do as a man. This raises a whole new subject.
Yes.
But yeah, I worked through it by myself, and I think in the past my default response would have been, let's distract myself, let's get really busy, let's find a project or a goal and get deeply into that so I don't have to think about the realities of what's happened. But I think as I'm older, I've realized that you can't run from feelings, and you can't run from trauma, and you can't run from situations, real life situations. You can't run from upset. These things have happened and they scar you, and the scar only becomes smoother when you work at it, and when you become one with it, and when you heal it through being present with it. And that's what I did. And I just kept myself to myself, and I tried to feel it, tried to feel the pain. I felt the pain until I didn't feel the pain. I literally, like that, I just sat with it every day until it just disappeared one day, just totally vanished. And it even took me by surprise. And I started to think about the things that used to trigger the upset, and it just wasn't there anymore. So somehow I healed myself.
Yeah. What you're describing sounds a little bit like meditation. Was it a meditation exercise or a different kind of practice?
Not a conscious meditation, no. It was really just to be in touch with my feelings, and instead of having that butterfly sensation in your stomach and the hurt sensation, and then doing something to avoid it, I just stayed with it. I just felt it, and then tried to associate with what I was feeling, associate with that sensation, without labeling it as bad or good, just recognizing it.
Yeah. That is really powerful.
It was very powerful, very powerful, because I went from broken to healed in a matter of weeks, literally a matter of weeks after a 12-year marriage.
Right. And that's a substantial length of marriage.
Yeah. And so once I'd healed, I then I didn't have any anger, I didn't have any hatred, I didn't have any bad feelings, and so there was no reason to have a disharmonious relationship. I just carried on. I thought, my life's got to continue. I can either have a battle every time, or it can be great. So I decided, I made the choice. We have a great relationship, and that'll be good for the children too.
Yeah, no, most definitely, because, when I do talk to young people, one of the things they do say to me is that when their parents are no longer working or no longer living together, is that they do appreciate when there is when parents are being kind to each other.
Yeah. 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 Okay, that's good to know, isn't it? So
It is, yeah, because there's a lot of evidence to suggest that children do better in a two-parent family. But from my real life experience, children prefer the parents to be harmonious with each other, regardless of whether that's
yeah,
in the same house or different houses.
I would agree with that. Yeah, very much so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, they learn more from that, and they feel more safe to be themselves within
Yeah.
that in terms of growing up.
Yeah. Because I mean, if they're in a volatile family, if the parents have a volatile relationship, then that's essentially the role modeling that they're receiving. The parents are split up, but they're still being kind to each other. That's the role modeling that they're receiving. One is clearly better than the other, from my way of looking at it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So how do you juggle being a dad and because I'm guessing you're working full time or
Yeah.
full time-ish.
Yeah.
How do you juggle all of that?
So on the days that my children were with my wife, it's not a problem.
Right.
On the days that they're with me, I juggle my schedule because as a trainer, I can organize my own schedule and I'm fairly flexible. So I try to arrange it during the school hours so that I can get as much done during that time. And if on occasion when I'm working, when I haven't, on the days I have my children, I either take them to the gym with me or I ask my wife if she's available to take them. And so we work together to try and make it happen.
Yeah. So I guess you guys aren't living too far apart from each other.
No, we're not too far apart. So maybe 15-minute drive. So
Okay.
it's pretty convenient.
Yeah, that's doable, right?
Yeah, it's doable. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. So the journey into fitness training, has that been a good one for you? Or did that seem like
That's
another way
my
to go on?
fitness training and health is my passion. And I knew from a very young age, and I think I was lucky to discover boxing for another reason, is that I was always in training. So while all my mates and my friends were out drinking and experimenting with all those things that they experiment with as you're growing older, I was always in training. And I never received any peer pressure to drink alcohol, to take drugs, to smoke, because they all knew, oh, Claude's in training. He doesn't do that. That was my get out of jail card. And it was great. And I was in training. So I knew that to survive in a boxing ring, I had to be fit and I had to be healthy and I couldn't cut any corners. So I was very, very dedicated, very dedicated. And I developed a respect for my health and for my body. The respect for my health being that I knew to be the best performer I could be, I needed to have the best nutrition I could get. And I needed to train the best way possible. So I used to read loads of books, read books about food, read books about training, and I would learn from, this is pre-YouTube era, so I didn't have access to videos and things, but I'd go to the library and I'd just read all the information I could get and put it into practice and experiment. And I haven't lost that habit. So even to this very day, I get up early and I feel I need to exercise as soon as I get out of bed, because that's what I was conditioned to doing when I was boxing from a young age.
Yeah. Okay, so you're bringing a lot of wisdom into the community from your own personal experience, and I'm guessing education as well.
Yeah, I'd like to think so. I mean, whether it's wisdom or not, it's my viewpoint, and some people will look at it as wisdom, and some people think, no, he's talking a lot of rubbish. But I can't resonate with everybody. So some people will resonate with me, and some people won't.
Yeah. Well, I guess everybody is different, and we've got all different body types and different desires and outcomes for our training as well.
Absolutely, yes, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So do you prefer working with men or women, or is it a combination of both you're doing?
I have a mixture of men and women as my clients and different age groups. So my oldest client is 77,
Nice
and,
one.
and she only took up weightlifting last September. So she's only been doing it for 6 months. And my youngest, I've had younger clients who've been teenagers. So it makes no difference to me, because I think I learn more as a coach from the most challenging of my clients. So I don't turn anybody down. The people I don't like to work with are the uncommitted, because they want you to do all the work. As you know, and as I know, responsibility starts with us. If you
Absolutely.
want results, you have to be prepared to do the work. I'm just there, essentially as a coach, I'm just there as a guide. I'm there to show them the way, but they've still got to make the trek.
Absolutely. I guess some people will be inspired by your journey.
Possibly, yeah. Again, I don't know. I, I don't know if I've ever done it with that in mind. I just do whatever feels right to me, and it's evolved to what it is today. And some people may look at that, and yeah, I'm sure I've had people come up to me and say, you know, checking in your job and going traveling was an amazing thing to do. I never have the courage to do that. And I always said to them, well, I never had the courage to stay in a job I didn't want to be in. I think it took more courage to stay in that job than to jump, which is why I jumped. So it was a little bit of courage involved, but at the same time, it wasn't. It was a natural thing for me to have to do.
Absolutely. I'm curious about the 77-year-old lady. How did she come to you? Because it's
Right.
extraordinary.
So her partner, who's 64, had back issues, and he was seeing a chiropractor,
Uh-huh.
and the chiropractor knew of me because I had trained one of the chiropractor's former clients, and she recommended that they come and see me. So they came to me, never having done weightlifting in their lives, with a view to the gentleman with the back issue just getting stronger. And he managed to coax his partner into doing training as well. So they would share the experience. And then after a few weeks, they started to notice a difference, a significant difference. And they turned around to me and said, how would you feel about training us for the next year? They said they wanted to commit to a whole year. I've never, ever had anybody turn around to me and say, I want to commit for a whole year of training, especially at the age of 77. And they forfeited their annual holiday abroad to pay for the training for a whole year. So they'd see me twice a week, every week. They never miss a session, even if they're sick. They always come in, and they're incredibly open-minded and willing to attempt anything.
That's extraordinary.
They are extraordinary people. And the gentleman is particularly extraordinary. I think they're both extraordinary, but one thing about him that I like a lot is that he's not afraid. A, he doesn't care what anybody thinks about what he's doing.
Great.
Which is a great quality.
Absolutely.
And B, he's not afraid to try anything. He will try anything, not afraid of failure. So, two great qualities. So I can throw anything at him and he's like, yeah, okay, let's give it a go. And it's beautiful. It's beautiful.
That's brilliant. That is brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think it's important that there's stories out in the world about people like this, because they're inspirational.
I think they are, without even realizing it. They don't even realize how inspirational they are.
Absolutely.
Because to them, their mindset and their way of life is normality. And sometimes they're unaware that other people don't think and approach life in the same manner. But they are pretty unique.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm guessing a lot of them finding their way to you has maybe a lot to do with the internal work that you've actually done in yourself, that you know you're open to other people's openness, if you like,
Yeah.
and haven't got a predetermined notion, this is what fitness is, this is what training is, and you have to have this kind of body and that kind of outlook and blah blah blah.
Well, my vision is very simplistic, in the sense of I'll work with anybody, and I take them the way they are, and I try to make them better. It's that simple. So from day to day, if I make them better over a long period of time, they can be significantly better. You've just got to stay the course. That's all it is. And that's a simple formula for any kind of training or progression for anything. It could be learning a language with lifting weights. Just about be 1% better next week than you were this week. Over a period of a year, you're 52% better. Simple.
Yeah, it certainly is. It certainly is. So, in terms of your longer term ideas, like where do you see yourself in 5 years from now?
I'm very much an in the moment sort of person.
Mm-hmm.
So that type of question is always really difficult for me, because I don't even take it for granted that I'm going to be alive in 5 years. And some people, they might see my way of life as extreme or obsessive, but I don't. I just value health more than anything else. And it's not to live to 100. It's to be able to do every day I'm alive what I want to do to my maximum potential. That's why I look after my body, and that's why I exercise, so that I can offer the best of me every single day. Simple objective. But 5 years from now, I might not be around in 5 years. And if I am, I'll still be doing that, and I'll still have that focus to be the best I can. Because I've got young children, and I want to be able to run faster than my son for as long as I'm alive. And want to be able to participate with them and have the same energy as them. And at the moment, I still do, and I still can function with a higher energy than them. And that's great, because they're keeping me on my toes. And I think I'd like to reach out to more people in a different way. So the viewers might not realize what London Real is. And you and I were both on the Life Accelerator course, which was all about learning new habits and positive habits, and habits that can change you quite dramatically. And I'm now considering the Business Accelerator, which is about developing a business idea and going with it in a very short period of time and launching it. And I think my business ideas are centered around plant-based diet, because I've been plant-based for 14 years, and helping people who want to be plant-based to make that journey. So I know a lot of people that are now gravitating towards plant-based. I'm not telling people they have to be plant-based. I'm just reaching out to the people that have made that choice for themselves, but are now at that point and think, well, how do I do this? How do I do it in the best way possible? How do I do this and exercise and feel fit at the same time, and to use my knowledge and my experience and my skills to advance them on their journey? So that's one of my business ideas, which, if it comes to fruition, people will be hearing about it in 8 weeks' time.
Yeah. Well, what stops you?
What stops me is I know that to get from point A to point B is going to be an uncomfortable journey, and it's going to require me stepping out of my comfort zone. And I'm not a very public figure. I'm not a naturally public figure. I'm not someone who seeks the limelight, who seeks adoration or anything like that. In fact, quite the opposite. I'm quite happy to sit back and let someone else take the spoils. But I realize that to make this happen, I'm going to have to push myself forwards a lot more. And so there is an element of resistance, but I'm 90% committed that I'm going to take the plunge.
Good for you, Claude.
Thank you.
Yeah, and as I think I said to you before the call, and I certainly said to a lot of my clients, you know, pretty much all day long, is in order to do something different, we have to do something different, and it is a golden opportunity to bring quality information out into the general public in a very unique and maybe organic kind of way that is unedited and undisputable, because you know you're living what you're doing.
Yeah.
You're actually living what you're doing, and so you're not you're not saying to people, do what I tell you to do rather than do what I do. You're actually
Yeah.
living proof of all the things you're talking about. And I've had the
100%.
pleasure, yeah, and I've had the pleasure of meeting you in private at our dinner party, and really enjoying your company. Hence why I asked you to come on my show.
Thank you.
You know, so thank you so much for coming on the show.
My pleasure. It's been great. I loved it.
Thank you, and we're looking forward to seeing more from you. And hopefully, maybe again at some point in the future, you'll come and chat with us again.
Anytime.
Fantastic. Thank you, Claude.
Thanks, Teresa.
You're welcome. And thanks to the audience as well.